Back when I was a teenager, life threw one of its curveballs at me. The kind that knocks the wind out of your sails and leaves you gasping for air. My parents' divorce came out of nowhere, shattering the comfortable illusion of my family life. Dad, with his quiet strength slowly cracking, wanted to find some way to bridge the growing gap between us. His solution? A father-son camping trip, a weekend in the wilderness, far from the tangled mess of lawyers and custody battles. He said nature had a way of healing the deepest wounds, and I guess I wanted to believe him. So we packed our gear into his old Jeep and set off, chasing solace in the heart of a forest whose ancient trees whispered secrets of a simpler time. We drove for hours to get to this secluded spot he'd found online, some forest preserve with a name I couldn't pronounce, and beauty that the brochure swore was second to none. It was sort of a peace offering, a chance for Dad and me to, I don't know, bond or whatever. We hiked deep into the woods, far from the nearest trailhead, and set up camp by a clearing. The first night was actually kind of nice. We had hot dogs over the fire, talked about the basketball playoffs. Normal stuff. But as the embers died down and we settled into our tent, the silence of the forest felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. That's when we heard it. The distinct sound of someone else setting up camp. Tent poles clinking, fabric rustling, the whole 9 yards. I remember thinking it was weird, considering how far we'd trekked to find a spot away from other people. But Dad just shrugged it off, said it was probably some late hikers finding their spot for the night. When the morning came, I stepped out expecting to see our new neighbors maybe borrow some coffee or something. But there was nothing. The forest was just as untouched as when we'd arrived, except for a set of muddy footprints that circled our tent and trailed off into the woods. Dad was unnerved, I could tell, but he masked it with a joke about Bigfoot looking for his missing sock. The second night, the air was different. There was a tension, like the forest was holding its breath. We tried to sleep, but it was a fitful, restless kind of rest. Then, in the dead of night, amidst the patter of rain on the canvas, we heard it again. The sound of someone or something just outside our tent. Closer this time. The fabric of our tent suddenly tautened, the unmistakable sound of a zipper being pulled filling the small space. Dad's hand found mine in the darkness, gripping it with a fear I'd never felt from him before. He shouted into the night, his voice booming against the patter of raindrops. "I'm armed, and you don't want to mess with me." A curse, low and guttural, answered him from the other side of the thin tent wall. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Whoever it was out there retreated into the storm. We didn't sleep after that. We sat there, backs against the canvas, staring at the opaque darkness, every sound a potential threat. Dad held the flare gun, the closest thing we could use to protect ourselves, his knuckles white. As soon as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, we packed up. We didn't speak, each lost in our own thoughts of what might have been lurking outside. The hike back to the car was silent, punctuated only by the squelch of our boots in the mud and the occasional distant snap of a twig that made us both jump. It wasn't until we were driving back to civilization, the car's heater battling the chill that had settled in our bones, that we heard the news on the radio. A jailbreak, a couple of towns over. Some dangerous folks on the loose. Dad and I exchanged a look, the same thought crossing our minds. Had one of them found us out there in the forest? The thought was chilling, more so than the rain that had soaked through our clothes. We never went back to that forest, never even talked about it again. But sometimes, when it's late at night and the rain is tapping against my window, I find myself listening for the sound of a zipper, and I wonder what might have happened if Dad hadn't lied about the gun. We were all about chasing that perfect shot, the one that racks up likes and sends our follower count soaring. So when we stumbled across this glamping Airbnb, hidden away in the dense folds of the forest and boasting 5-star amenities, it was like hitting the jackpot. The pictures online showed a luxury cabin with panoramic windows, a hot tub overlooking the wilderness, and rustic chic decor that was just screaming to be Instagrammed. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were in a glossy travel magazine, and for a bunch of city kids looking to up their blogging game, it was a dream come true. We arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of fiery orange and deep purple. The Airbnb was even more impressive in person, a wooden temple to modernity surrounded by ancient trees. It was like we'd stepped into another world, one where the air was fresher and the silence was a living thing. We spent the evening taking photos, the cabin and the encroaching night providing a dramatic backdrop. But as we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was subtle at first, just a nagging thought at the back of my mind. But then, as I was setting up a shot in the main living area, I noticed something odd about one of the decorative pieces. A glass eye, about the size of a marble, embedded in the wall. It was an unsettling choice for decor, but as I looked closer, a shiver ran down my spine. Behind the glossy surface was the unmistakable glint of a camera lens. I called the others over, and we quickly found more tiny cameras hidden in the most unexpected places, all of them trained on us. Our dream getaway was turning into a voyeuristic hellscape. The sense of isolation that had once felt liberating now closed in on us like a vice. We were miles from anyone else, alone with a host who had been silently spying on us all along. As we huddled together, debating whether to confront our peeping Tom or just get the hell out of Dodge, the emergency walkie-talkie that provided direct contact to our host crackled to life. The host's voice, oily and smooth, slithered through the speaker. "Everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. It was clear he'd been watching, listening, taking pleasure in our discomfort. The walkie-talkie's static buzz was the only reply we could muster as we stared at each other, paralyzed by the realization that our privacy had been nothing but an illusion. The host's laughter filtered through the crackle of the speaker, a sound that seemed to mock our panic. We were props in his twisted show, and the thought made my stomach churn. "Who are you?" I managed to spit out into the walkie-talkie, my voice a cocktail of anger and fear. But there was no response, just the hiss of static that seemed to laugh at us. We couldn't stay. The thought of spending another moment under the watchful eyes hidden around the cabin was unbearable. We packed our bags in record time, the adrenaline turning our movements frantic and jerky. As we zipped up our last suitcase, the walkie-talkie crackled again. Leaving so soon, the host's voice oozed through. "The night is just beginning." Ignoring the voice, we bolted for the door, our breath fogging up in the cold night air. We were about to step outside when we heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whirring sound. We froze. The glass eye in the wall had begun to move, its lens focusing on us with an intelligence that a mere camera shouldn't possess. It was as if the eye truly saw us, saw into us, and what it saw, it coveted. Panic surged through my veins as we stumbled out into the night, the darkness enveloping us like a shroud. The forest had transformed from a serene sanctuary into a claustrophobic labyrinth. Every rustle of the leaves sounded like footsteps on our trail, every snap of a twig a signal that we were being pursued. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, the vehicle an anchor to reality in the midst of our terror. As I fumbled with the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. I glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see the host standing in the window, watching us with that same glass eye. But there was only the darkness and tall pine trees obstructing my vision. We drove through the night, the cabin and its host becoming nothing more than a nightmare that clung to the edges of our consciousness. By the time we reached the city, the first light of dawn was breaking, casting a pale glow over the world that seemed so much safer in the daylight. But safety is an illusion, I've come to realize. Sometimes, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I can feel the weight of an unseen gaze, and I wonder if the host is still out there, watching, waiting, with his glass eye that sees far too much.